a wonderful Tanya Aldred here chairing for us. So Tanya is a cricket writer for The Wisdom and a journalist for The Guardian, and has been writing about this issue for a considerable time. So a lot of your work has been really inspiring for our cricket club, and has been kind of weaving all the separate issues together and binding them into one idea. So to chair us today, welcoming Tanya Aldred. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you guys for coming. I know it's been a really hot day and you've all got a million things to do. I'm going to be very quick because the main man is here and he's the person that you want to speak to. So I was just going to talk a little bit about Russell. So I remember, I think I phoned him out of the blue in 2015 because I'd been to a cricket game and I was suddenly struck at the end of it how it was a very kind of basic cricket green thing, just by how much waste there was afterwards. It was just stuff chucked all over the pitch. Nothing had been recycled, and I was kind of wanted to write something about it, but didn't know who to approach. And I don't actually know how I got Russell's number, but I was suddenly directed towards him, and he was at the time the sustainability manager at Lord's, and the only sustainability manager in cricket, I think. And he was very patient and took all my questions. And I wrote a piece, and because he also kind of expanded my knowledge of the intersection between cricket and climate, and although I was aware of sort of climate issues and I'd been writing about sport for 15 years, I hadn't really connected the two properly, other than perhaps emissions from flying and things like that. So I spoke to Russell in 2015, and then I think I met him in person in 2016 at Lord's when he was rummaging through the bins to try and check that everything had been put in the right recycling boxes, which is where you normally find him at Lord's test. And he's just been such an inspirational person in the climate and sport world. I think it really helps that he remembers facts really well, so he's not kind of scuffling through pieces of paper to find out statistics. But he's an expert in giraffes, as well as just being really knowledgeable about the sport climate intersection. So he's always really interesting, and he's a great guy. So over to you, Russ.
Thank you, Tanya. That's a big I'll better explain the giraffe piece first, I guess. Is that docked a bit? I actually did my PhD on giraffe conservation, nothing to do with sport, nothing to do with climate change specifically, but about environmental conservation in a slightly different way. So the random giraffe fact has been explained. A bit immodest putting on more pictures of me when you can see me, but actually my second best moment in cricket was actually this one, when I was asked to do 20 minutes on Test Match Special during the England-India Test match in, it was 2016, 17? I'm not sure. But it started raining, and Tanya and I and one other person actually did an hour and 20 minutes just talking about sustainability in cricket. And when I came out, I genuinely thought it was about half an hour, because we just had the greatest conversation around this. So some of you may have heard it, I don't know. My background. Environmental sciences. As I said, I've got a PhD in conservation biology. I started working at Lord's Cricket Ground because one of my students said, Lord's needs match day stewards. So I just started working at Lord's as a match day steward back in 2000. A few years later, I got a full-time role there. So I started in 2006. Because of my background and my interest in environmental sciences, I started looking at our carbon footprint. I started looking at waste management, recycling. Realised that we weren't doing very well. So I took a report to the chief exec. He said, this is important. Would you like a full-time job? So I became the first sustainability manager at any UK sports venue, and that was in cricket. And I think cricket ought to be proud that we were the first sport to really start looking at these issues. So from that, I set up an organisation called BASIS, which is where all the branding comes on my next slides. So I'm chief executive of BASIS now. I left Lord's at the end of 2019. Thought it was a really exciting opportunity to start working with BASIS full-time. Global pandemic comes along, kind of messes up everybody's plans, but BASIS has grown since then. We were, even about 2 years ago, we were probably about 30 odd members. We've now got 140 members and 1,500 affiliates. talking to us about climate change issues, environmental sustainability issues, and how they interact with sport. Now, I used lots and lots of slides when I talk, so I crash through things quite quickly. I'm very happy if you have a pressing question to ask while I'm speaking, but obviously we've got a Q&A at the end as well, so happy either way. But I tend to kind of whiz through lots of stuff, hopefully to inspire that conversation. But I've been asked to talk about the Hit for Six report. It looks directly at the impact of cricket, the impact on cricket of climate change. Specifically heat, drought and extreme weather. And it looks at everything from impact on countries down to individual players, and I'll summarise some of the report a bit later. It looks at potential consequences, and then it gives advice and recommendations at the end. So second part of this talk is going to be looking directly at that. First part is a bit more introductory and some of the issues around climate change and sport. So a bit of background. So the Hit for Six report specifically, there is a copy at the front here, and I've got a copy as well if anybody wants to have a look. It's available on the BASIS website. If you do want to read this one, hopefully some of you have read it already perhaps. But it's actually one of 6 in a series, and there are more planned that are coming out on this, one of which will coincide with the World Cup in India in a couple of years' time. The first one that is part of this series is something called Weather Warning, Britain's Special Places Under Threat, and it looked at a variety of locations. So there was a National Trust property and a few other things, but there's a case study of Corbridge Cricket Club. Some of you may know it because in 2015, Storm Desmond came through. Corbridge Cricket Club, here, that's what happened after Storm Desmond came through. Hopefully you can see at the back. Most of the pavilion, having spent £130,000 on it 2 years previously. This is a village cricket club, lots of fundraising went into that. It was under 5 feet of water. The pitch was covered in silt and rubbish from the flood. £20,000 worth of their equipment was damaged. Absolutely wrecked this club. But the ECB came along, they gave them a grant. That year, ECB had something like, and this is from memory, apologies, I don't always get absolute facts on, so don't quote me on this one. I think they spent something like 1.5 million, 1.5, 1.6 million helping village clubs recover, or smaller clubs recover from weather damage. At the moment, they're budgeting £4 million a year for weather damage to clubs. That's the money that they've got to put away into their budgets. So this is an increasing problem. Cricket seemed to resonate, or sport in general. So the following year, 2018, Game Changer was published, How Climate Change Impacts Sports in the UK. Cricket was one of 4 sports that was reviewed in that document. It coincided with the Sochi 2018 Winter Olympics. Then it was Hit for Six, it was published. I'm going to talk about that extensively shortly. There's one on the Rugby World Cup, published in 2019, and it looked at the nations affected by climate change, so Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, low-lying island nations that are going to be threatened by sea level rise, but also the big emitters, Canada, Australia, European countries, South Africa, Russia. So they had a neat contrast between those island states and the big emitters all playing in one tournament. So it was their kind of narrative for that particular report. Rings of Fire looked at the Tokyo Olympics. 2020, obviously held in 2021, and it warned about the impacts of extreme heat and humidity. Now, just as a very slight aside, in the tennis, Paula Badosa, a Spanish player, got to the quarterfinals, I think, at Wimbledon as well. But in her quarterfinal match at the Tokyo Olympics, she collapsed on court because of the heat, taken off in a wheelchair, couldn't continue. Daniil Medvedev, world number 1 for a short time earlier in the year. He was experiencing, well, at the end of the second set, they were allowed to go off for a cooling break. He had a 10-minute cold shower, came back out onto court, and he said as soon as he hit the heat, he just felt like his entire body cramped. He kept playing, and at one point, when he went down for this treatment, the umpire said to him, "Can you continue to play? Can you finish the match?" This is what he said: "I can finish the match, but I could die. If I die, will you be responsible?" Now imagine if you are an official, you're the on-seat umpire, and a player says that to you. That's the level of emotion and the pain that he was feeling. He wanted to play that match. This is an elite athlete who wants to get to the Olympic final, but that's the stress that his body is under. So the way he feels, but the way the official feels, there's an emotional connection in there somehow. And something we need to look at. We're pushing some of our elite sports people to extremes. But take that down to kids that might be wanting to go out and play. This weekend we might be up at 38, 40 degrees in the southeast of England. Will our young people still be going out playing sports? Back to the... and in the long distance swimming in the Olympics, it was moved to 6:30 in the morning, so it'd be cooler. It was still 29 degrees in the water. 29 degrees. It was like, one of the competitors said it was like swimming in hot soup. And this is relevant because about 3 years ago in America, a long-distance swimmer actually died while competing. And they didn't drown. They died of organ failure because they couldn't sweat, they couldn't release the heat from their body because they were in warm water. Back to the report, there's one called Slippery Slopes for the Winter Olympics, Beijing Winter Olympics. And the most, that was the most recent one. Now, it's one of 6, as I said, and I'm just going to run through the impact that these reports actually had. So, the rugby, World in Disunion, 9 media stories came from that. Potential reach, 2.3 million people globally, and engagement, 35. I don't know what that number means. Okay, it was reported, so I put a little asterisk there. I genuinely don't know what it means, but the higher the number, the better. More people engage with it, read it, whatever. So World in Disunion, rugby won. Game changer, arguably the first one on sport. So 23 stories, either broadcast or print, 700 million people, engagement 599. Whatever that means, but it's a bigger number. Rings of Fire around the Olympics, Tokyo Olympics. 37 stories, 1 billion people reached, possibly. The engagement number keeps going up. Slippery Slopes, 102 media stories. A little bit lower on the potential reach. I think it wasn't reported on in China, that's why that population's lower, because it was the Beijing Olympics, they didn't want criticism. But finally, hit for 6. 296 media stories, 1.4 billion reach. Really strongly reported in India, Pakistan, but also Australia, England. So this report specifically on cricket has had huge impact. And I still get calls to talk about it, as I have tonight. I'll be clear, I didn't write it. I wrote the foreword and I advised on it, but others, more specialists than me, wrote some of the chapters. So let's just give it context where this sits, and there's lots of information out there about sport, climate change. So a bit of context as well. This is true about anything, surely, so let's try and see if we can make this relevant. The first line in the section in the Game Changer report about cricket is this. Of all of the major pitch sports, cricket will be the hardest hit by climate change. So that's what I'm going to focus on this evening and take us through some of those impacts. But do we actually care about this? So a report has just come out from YouGov. I think it's only in the last couple of weeks. I've only seen it in the last week or so. Global Sports, uncovering the socially responsible sports fan. So in the UK, 63% of adults identified as being sports fans. Global average is about 76%, according to this study. When asked to select from a list of 56 issues, British sports fans included climate change 5th and renewable energy 6th. The things that are above it were, you can probably guess, Europe, immigration, privatisation of the NHS, and healthcare in general. And then it was climate change and renewable energy. Maybe tricky to see from the back. The blue is the global average, the red are sports fans. So in every one of these questions, sports fans are slightly higher than the global average. They're asked questions whether they agree with these or not. I'm willing to pay more for sustainable energy. Sports fans are more receptive to it. I consider myself an environmentalist. 5% more sports fans. I think green energy is the future. Worries me that a third of people don't think that, but again, the more sports fans. I try to buy only from companies who are socially and environmentally responsible. So it appears, in this sample at least, sports fans are engaged in this. So we've got an opportunity to talk to them. They also asked the top 3 causes UK sports fans feel positively about their favourite sports league or team supporting. Anti-racism, environmental sustainability is number 2, diversity inclusion number 3. And what causes the sports fans believe their leagues should be doing more to support? The top 3. Number 1 is environmental sustainability. Anti-racism number 2. Reducing carbon footprint number 3. Our fans are engaged in this. Sport should be doing something about this and leading the way and having these conversations. And just a bigger study, a global study by Oxford University and United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, surveyed 1.2 million people, 50 countries. 64% said climate change is an emergency. In the UK, it's 81%. The language area is key. Now, they were probably introduced to the word emergency, but they still agreed that that was a relevant word that we should be using. It's not just, yeah, we're a bit upset about it, or we think it might be a bit of a problem. It's an emergency, and our politicians need to know that, and sport needs to take that on board. For my own organisation, I'm just going to present how we approach sport, because the easiest thing to say would be, don't put on an event. The most sustainable event you can hold is the one that never happens. You have no impact. But let's face it, we want to play cricket, we want to watch cricket, all the other sports. So recreational and professional sport happens, it's going to continue to happen. We've got to recognise that. We've got a two-way relationship with the environment. We have an impact on it, but it impacts us as well. It impacts the way that we play our sports. Sport also has positive social and economic benefits, so we've got to find a balance as to how we manage our environmental impacts against those social and economic ones as well. So that's sustainability of sport, the way that we put on our events, but there's another opportunity, and it's sustainability through sport. If sport wants to do this, wants to take this position, it can be an ambassador for all of these issues. We can do this in a trusted way because we're being impacted. We can genuinely say, climate change is going to impact cricket, therefore we take it seriously, therefore we're going to take action and do something about it. So yes, let's get our own house in order, but it's imperative that we also talk about it. I was going to ask anybody if they want to throw out a definition, but I've just put up the one that I'm going to present. If you Google for a definition of sustainability, you'll find quite a few, but the one that comes up most frequently is one from something called the Brundtland Report, Our Common Future. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Most of you may have heard that already. There's something intuitive about it, kind of makes sense. The problem word I have is needs. Who defines needs? My needs, as somebody who lives in the UK, in a Western country, developed country, I'd probably identify them quite differently to somebody living in sub-Saharan Africa or a rural village in India, or wherever you want to choose in the world. So who defines needs? But let's put that aside for a moment. The definition feels intuitive. Don't mess things up now for the future, basically. And it develops these concepts of environmental protection, social equality and economic growth. And there is somebody's actually worked using very similar language. Somebody's crafted a definition for sustainability in sport. It uses the same language but shifts it over to a sporting context. A better definition that I like is one that used to be used in a British standard, BS 8900. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's how to run a sustainable business effectively. They now use the Brundtland definition. They've ditched this definition, which I find frustrating, because within those, I think it's 12 words, there are actually 5 related concepts. Economic activity, environmental responsibility, social progress, we've already seen. But balanced, we've got to balance these out, they're all important. We've got to look at society, we've got to look at the environment. And yes, look, businesses have to run and make a profit, so there's got to be an economic element. It's how you use the way that you spend your money. It shouldn't always be the cheapest price, but can I do something good for my community? Can I work with local providers, local companies, etc.? But we've got to balance these things together. And that word is absolutely key. We're not just talking about the next 3 months, we're not just talking about next year or even 5 years, we're talking about decades or generations. We've got to plan for how we work in those timescales. I think it's really important to look at the language as well. So the Brundtland Report definition is a political report, effectively. It's United Nations. Economic growth. It's got to be growth. We've got to keep growing. Whereas this definition is about activity. So it includes all those interactions that we have. Environmental protection. That's very active. It's us. We're protecting the environment. What about environmental responsibility? The environment can look after itself. It's done it for billions of years without human beings. So we just need a responsible approach to the environment. Social equality. There's two ways of doing that. You could actually drive down a lot of people to make sure everything's equal. And at the moment we seem to be creating a very small number of an elite, if you want to use that term, and pushing down a lot of other people. Whereas we should be looking for social progress, where everybody comes up together. So language is really important when looking at these things. Just a couple of other quick definitions. I've just realised I've packed in too many slides and I need to speed up a wee bit. But sustainability depends on three things. Perpetuity, it's got to continue forever. You've got to be able to reproduce these things. And you need to be able to disseminate information freely so everybody can use this knowledge, use this information. And a political one from a great book by Jane Davidson, who was a minister in the Welsh Parliament. And she wrote a book called Lessons from a Small Country about how they introduced the Future Generations Act, where in the Welsh Parliament you have to consider the impacts on generations to come. This bill is going through the UK Parliament. I have my doubts that it's actually going to get through during this government term. But you do things differently and you do different things. So you've got to look to the future, integrate those three elements that we've talked about. Collaborate, find and deliver long-term solutions, prevent problems from occurring or getting worse, and find new ways to involve people in making these decisions. So where will these three elements intersect? No expense spared on graphics, by the way. We've got this opportunity to be sustainable. In fact, these things don't just intersect like a Venn diagram. Our economy sits entirely within society, and our society sits entirely within the environment. That's just a fact. You can't get away from that. So we have to work within that. Now, for basis, we actually simplify this even further. So when I go into a chief exec's office, not you will, you get this, I know. But when I go into a chief exec's office, they don't want me talking about sustainable development principles and goals and social, economic. They want it simplified. I just talk about health. One thread across all of this is health. So it's personal health, the people that you work with, the fans that come to your ground, the players, the people you interact with. It's about community health, the business relationships that you have. But it's also about planetary health. And you can just expand that up with that simple thread of health running through all of this. And we do have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. Now, sitting behind these 17 goals, there are 147 targets and there are 249 KPIs. This gets really complex really, really quickly. So yes, you can kind of shoehorn things into these headings, but it's actually quite difficult to operationalise. Just think about health. And if you want to expand it to community, individual and planetary health, then economic, social and environmental. There are some sports doing really good policies around sustainability. So England Golf, which just published a sustainability strategy just a couple of weeks ago. Lawn Tennis Association published theirs just before Queen's, that happened 2 weeks before Wimbledon. So some governing bodies are putting these out. Cricket hasn't done it yet, but it's in progress. And it should happen within a year to 18 months, I believe. But things are happening. The ECB, definitely. I'm aware there's probably people in the room that know a bit more about climate change than I do. I'm also painfully aware there's people in this room who know more about cricket than I do. But I'm hoping I can link things together. So I'm going to run through some climate basics, just to make sure that we kind of all do get things. What are we actually talking about in terms of climate change and refocusing? So the issue is the increased energy that's trapped in the atmosphere. We always talk about temperature because that's the thing that everybody can understand. It makes sense. We see it on the weather forecast all the time. We're looking at temperatures. But fundamentally, it's about energy being trapped in the atmosphere. And that is a direct corollary that the energy in the atmosphere will create the temperature as well. It's caused by higher concentrations of the greenhouse gases. And I'll come on to exactly what they are. So the sun comes through the atmosphere. It's the lower frequency radiation that's bouncing back out from the Earth that is actually being trapped by the gases. But just the fact that you have more of these gases that can trap that energy means that we get more energy in the atmosphere, the temperatures go up, more power into storm systems, those kind of things. So it's fundamentally about that energy being trapped in there. And the main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels, but also from, actually I'll list them in just a moment, I'm jumping ahead of myself, methane, largely produced by biology, by life, produces methane. Nitrous oxides is an interesting one, because sometimes in pitch sports we can talk about, well, the grass is taking in carbon, but if you put an inorganic nitrate fertiliser onto that grass, it will be re-emitting nitrous oxides back out as it's metabolised. So there's an interesting balance there. And there are three other chemicals there, the H gases, perfluorocarbons and sulfur tetrafluoride, which are industrial chemicals, probably shouldn't impact around sport. But those are the major greenhouse gases that there are, and higher concentrations in the atmosphere are causing this energy to be trapped. Burning fossil fuels construction, a huge amount comes from construction, from cement in particular. So it's not just about switching to renewable energy. That's what we hear about most of the time, but we've got to change the way that we build. We've got to change our agriculture, we've got to change manufacturing and the way that we're using land as well. So it's not just about renewable energy. We're not going to solve it just by solar panels and wind turbines. Impacts, we're probably very well aware of many of these. Increased global temperatures, more frequent extreme weather, coral reef bleaching, habitat destruction, changing agricultural systems, melting permafrost, sea level rising. Keep listing some of these impacts. And I'm pushing through these quite quickly. I'm getting to the cricket bit in a minute and where these are relevant. So we're looking at floods. We're looking at droughts, more wildfires, melting of glaciers and the poles, and bigger storm systems, hurricanes, cyclones, etc. Carbon dioxide concentrations are going up. This is undeniable. I remember I heard about this on about the 11th of May. It's about 400 parts per million. Was just we thought that would be a disastrous point. The safe point is actually about here. It's 350. And we passed that in the late 1980s. Well, that's what's considered to be the safe point. We're currently I think we're about 428 parts per million or so. This is just going up and up. So all the promises made at the climate change meetings, Glasgow, last year, still going up, as things are at the moment. Has anybody seen this before? XR people, you must have, but... whenever BBC News have anything on climate change, you'll see this in the background. This is a professor at the University of Reading developed this, called Show Your Stripes. You can Google Show Your Stripes. So this is a representation of climate change in England. This is about 1880. Each line is a year, and this is up to 2020. The deeper the red, the warmer the year. The deeper the blue, the colder the year, on average. You can see a trend, I'm pretty sure. I'm going to use those a bit later. To put it in a more traditional way, a graph, global average temperatures. It's pretty apparent that temperatures are increasing. Now, a graph that I always use for anybody who's a wee bit sceptical is this one, and it's obvious what it says, isn't it? No, it's not. Let me explain it. This is a very particular data set. It's temperatures from the Greenland ice sheet. It's a very specific data set because if you look over here, these are Fahrenheit temperatures, but there's about 20-degree variability going back about 100,000 years. So there's been significant change. It's varied a lot, and sometimes it's happened very, very rapidly. And 100,000 years is relevant because that's the amount of time that we, as human beings, recognisably, as us, Homo sapiens, if you saw somebody from 100,000 years ago up here dressed in a blue jacket and white shirt, he'd probably look a bit like me. Possibly shouldn't have said it quite that way. He would look like all of us. He or she would look like all of us, So these are modern humans. And all through this time, migrations out of Africa, Aboriginal people arriving in Australia, migrations of modern humans into South Asia and Europe, because of course the ice sheets are retreating back. All of this is defined by hunter-gathering, nomadic, they were moving around. So we had all this variability, and then this happened. Somehow it became stable, and we have this remarkably stable climate. What that allowed us to do is plan. We could begin agriculture and we could develop civilization. So the issue with climate change isn't we're going to kill the world and the planet's going to end somehow. It isn't that human beings are going to go extinct, although that may be possible. The issue is we've never lived with agriculture and civilizations outside of a period that isn't easy to plan for. We kind of know what's going to happen next year, so we can plant our seeds. We can farm, we can do agriculture. If we were potentially we're knocking ourselves back into this crazy period, and that's what the issue is. We could be knocking ourselves into a period of really dynamic weather where we just can't plan. And climate change, although we talk about an average change, we're about 1.28 degrees increase above what is called the pre-industrial average. Now remember that the Paris Climate Change Agreement said we shouldn't breach 1.5 degrees. We're already at 1.28. When the Paris Climate Change Agreement was made, we were already at 1.1 degree. So we're pushing the limits of where we may be safe. But it's not consistent all over the world. Some places are warming much faster. Parts of Siberia are about 10 degrees warmer now than they were. Tokyo is about 4 degrees warmer than it was. You know, Siberia had temperatures at 78 degrees. There's one town in Siberia which now has a recorded temperature range of 100 degrees. It's gone hottest temperature ever recorded, plus 38, lowest temperature ever recorded, minus 72. Is that right? Yeah, or minus 62. 100 degree range. And I use this one as a graph of 2015. I use it for a particular reason because it shows a particular thing, and it's not because I'm trying to manipulate data in some way, but it's the first time these things happened in this particular year. And if you look, it goes from record coldest, the coldest ever recorded, to record warmest. So we talk about warming generally, but you're getting record cold in certain areas because the Greenland ice sheet is melting faster than ever before. Now this is relevant because we have this nice current that comes up here, a warm current. If this ice sheet keeps melting, that current might stop about here. We'll experience much colder winters and hot summers. That keeps us mild. So there are other impacts apart from just the atmosphere changing. The other key thing on this one is the oceans warming so rapidly. The oceans were the warmest they'd ever been in 2015. Now since then they've maintained that heat. It's no longer a record. This is where hurricanes develop, and this is where cyclones develop. So there's much more energy in the water. Much more water is going to be sucked up. Much more is going to be dropped down when those hurricanes and cyclones hit land. So more power in those storms as well. The jet stream is changing. The jet stream is this wind that whizzes around the top and the south of the planet. It moves up and down in summer and winter. Now, those of us old enough in the room to remember, let's say winters 30 or 40 years ago, you knew that from mid-December through to, let's say mid-February, it was going to be cold, generally. You'd have a cold period that would last 8 to 10 weeks. You'd be fairly confident. What do we get in the winter now? Like 3 days that are cold and a couple of days that are quite mild, and then 3 or 4 days that are cold again, and maybe 5 days that are mild, and it fluctuates. It's because there's so much energy in this system that the jet stream is buckling, and you're getting this effect. If you're south of the jet stream, you've got warm air. If you're north of the jet stream, you've got cold air. And as these pass over the UK, we get warm, cold, and that's how our winters work now. These predictions are coming true, and we can see it. We actually know that that's how winters work. And I bring in a fantastic sporting analogy. Anybody who's used battle ropes in the gym, you can wiggle them around a little bit and not doing much energy, but as soon as the big energy gets in there, you start getting these big cycles. So you need to have a huge amount of energy to get the jet stream to flex and bend. I've not even got onto the report, but yeah, I'm still on climate change, aren't I? I need to speed up. I love this picture. This is it's knitted together from a few pictures, but it's at one point in time. There's a one time that the UK, from a satellite picture, was completely covered in snow in December 2010. Totally covered in snow, every part of the country. Never happened before. At the same time, Greenland was 10 degrees warmer than it should have been, because that bending of the jet stream has caused this odd imbalance of the temperatures. Lots of information out there around climate change. And absolutely key in this first one, this was published towards the end of last year, about October last year, and the language in it changed. Scientists used to talk about probabilities and likelihoods and that sort of thing. I say this as a scientist. It did us no favours whatsoever, because the press, all due respect, Tanya, and the man or woman in the street would think that's a bit vague. It sounds a bit vague. It's not. When a scientist talks about something being probable, it's 95% chance it's going to happen. That's not a good risk to take. But in this report, they started using words like unequivocal. They were much more definite. Unequivocal, widespread rapid changes, unprecedented over centuries or thousands of years, and human-induced climate changes affecting our weather and climate extremes in every region. Far more definitive, far more definite. But what are we doing in the UK? Generally hotter, drier summers, high variability, and that's important. Increased temperatures, flooding, drought issues, coastal flooding, and wildfires. There was actually a ladies' golf tournament about 2 years ago now, 2020, it was called off because of a wildfire. Cobham Common was on fire, and it was at Wentworth Golf Course, I think, and the fire came across, smoke, and then the flames just appeared on the side of the course, and they cancelled it. This was an elite level ladies' golf tournament. But this report from June last year says we're falling behind on our adaptation to climate change. We're not doing enough. I think I'm going to go a wee bit over time. Apologies, I've packed in a wee bit too much. So the Here for Six report, as I said at the beginning, looks at impacts on individuals as well as on countries. So what are some of these impacts that are going to happen? It looks at physiological, psychological impacts, and the impact on performance of trying to bat, bowl and field in high temperatures. Heat-related issues, combination of the environmental conditions, the intensity of your exercise. Now, arguably a batter is probably having more intense exercise than a fielder at times. If you're out in the deep, you're probably signing a few autographs or whatever. And the clothing that you wear as well. So how does the body actually deal with heat? You generate heat internally with intense exercise, but you also get it from the outside. Excuse me. And the only way you can lose heat is by increasing skin blood flow. So you're actually sort of radiating that heat out, or you sweat and it evaporates from you. Now, if that's blocked because of the clothing that you're wearing, it makes it very difficult. But also, if it's very humid, it's not going to evaporate. You can't lose heat in a very, very humid atmosphere. Also, if you're in temperatures that are close to body temperature, so mid-30s and upwards, you're not going to radiate that heat out. So with extreme heat, you just can't lose the extra body heat you're generating. Psychologically, your brain is affected by extreme heat as much as your body. You feel tired in your body, but your brain is being impacted as well. It reduces your ability to perform complex tasks. Now look, playing cricket is a complex task. Your vigilance, maintaining your attention, focusing on the bowler as they're steaming in at you to bowl a ball at 90 miles an hour. Your short-term memory is affected. You know, a captain trying to think of his field places, whatever, with his brain sort of fogging because of these extremes of temperature. And doing dual tasks, 2 or more functions at the same time becomes really difficult. And think of the complexity of actually batting. You're focusing on the bowler coming in, but you're also thinking about, well, hopefully it's instinctive, but your brain is telling your feet where to move, how to lift the bat, etc. These are really complex tasks that people are doing. And you start to get a problem when you get heat impacts. Physiologically, these are increasing in terms of severity. Heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. I'm going to describe each one in just a moment. Multiple factors contribute to these. I won't go through all, but temperature, body size, fitness, your general health, whether you've already got sunburn will impact how you're affected. And the conditions will vary. The combination of conditions will vary. So conditions you've played in perfectly one time, the next time you may actually have an adverse reaction to. So heat cramps. Exactly that. You get a cramp in the muscle that you're exercising. Dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, reduced energy. It's localized. Typically you can go off, you can have a drink, get some electrolytes, have something to eat, and you'll recover from it. But it's unpleasant at the time. You feel thirsty, you're sweating, you're tired. Heat exhaustion. Inability to continue exercising in heat. You really just feel like you don't want to do this anymore. You just want to stop. These are all described in the HIP 6 report in more detail. Most often seen in unacclimatised individuals. So if you go to a new country, so think of England going to India or Australia, with a very, very short lead-in time to acclimatise. We tend to do this now. Tours used to go 6 weeks before and play multiple matches before we go into a test match. Now you're there for a week maybe. A few knocks in the nets and then you're straight into a test match. How can you perform in that? It could also be because of unusual conditions. So, not too long ago I was saying that by 2030 or mid-2030s we might be looking at temperatures in the low 40s. We might have those on Sunday. It's been predicted, and I'll come to that in a moment. Imagine you've got a tournament at the weekend. All through the week it's maybe, it's hot, 28, 31, this feels pretty hot, and you wake up on Saturday morning and it's 42 degrees. Do you play that tournament? You've got risks, particularly for younger people who don't necessarily respond to heat as well. So there's a lot of responsibility sits in this. So faintness, dizziness, weakness, more sweating, and you start to move into heat stroke and nausea, which is the next one. Now, heat stroke is an actual failure of your body's thermoregulation, your ability to reduce your temperature. Happens when you're over 40.5 degrees, I think is the medical definition. And it's a medical emergency, could result in death. So there's a range of potential impacts. High body temperature affects your nervous system and it affects your organ function. Intense exercise produces large amounts of heat. It could be with lower levels of exertion, but wearing clothing or protective equipment in hot and humid conditions. Does that sound familiar? Is there any sport you can think of where you're covered in protective equipment and clothing from neck to wrist, sometimes short sleeves, trousers? Perfect definition for cricket. So these impacts can be felt. Indirect effects, your skin blood flow, your sweating, dehydration can compromise your cardiovascular. If your blood volume decreases, sweat is coming effectively from your body tissues, from your blood. So your blood volume is decreasing. If it's too hot, you're pushing blood to your skin, not to your internal organs, because you're trying to reduce heat. This has an impact on cardiovascular function. Blood becomes thicker, harder to pump around the body, and makes it much harder to function. So overheating, low blood sugar, reduced cardiovascular functioning come from this. This is medical problems. So a quick case study, and this is all in the report, should you wish to have a look. So a published study has shown that batters have a greater increase in their core body temperature against fielders. I don't think that's too much of a surprise. Fielders can rest for a period, batsmen are much more tension, running up and down a lot more, so they've got a greater risk of heat illness. And the hotter a batter gets, the harder they think they're working. Whether they are or not, they think they're working harder. And it will genuinely feel like that. So the people who wrote this particular study, particular chapter in the study, in the 6 report, they took an international batsman who recreated his highest test score in county cricket, 300 not out, and they exactly replicated the full day, the balls that he received and the runs up and down that he made. And they did that in a controlled environment, an indoor cricket academy at 15 degrees. The actual day was about 18 degrees, so temperature was slightly lower, but it was in full kit, completely replicated that day. It was day 3 of the Yorkshire versus Hampshire game at the Rose Bowl in August 2011. Does anybody know who this batsman was? I wouldn't have known either. Did you guess?
Root.
No, it wasn't Root.
Crawley.
No. It was Michael Carberry. Possibly not the most famous batsman, but he scored 300 not out on that day. 300 not out, 427 balls, 512 minutes. So they had him running up and down, exactly matching what he'd done during that actual match. Okay, he's kind of reformatted himself somehow. So oxygen consumption, the average oxygen consumption, the blue is a morning session, lunch to tea, and then post-tea is in grey. So average oxygen consumption went up through the day. The peak oxygen consumption stayed about the same, but then went up in the final session of the day. Heat production, sort of calculated internal heat production, also similarly went up significantly in the final session. So the exertion, now you could argue that there's a non-controlled element in here, that towards the end of the day you're pushing a bit harder, maybe you're running a bit more. But as a general trend, the body was responding and it became harder. He needed more oxygen, he was generating more heat, more exertion, and it's becoming harder. Now, this was in England in 18 degrees. We'll come on to a couple of examples shortly where it was far more extreme. The average heat production, 36 kilojoules per minute, equivalent to running continuously at 8 kilometres an hour. Now that's roughly running the speed you might run a marathon, but in full cricket gear. So a batsman is actually using the same amount of energy as somebody running a marathon. Probably wouldn't have even guessed, wouldn't guess us. So what are these implications? There are implications around safety for the game. So games could be postponed or possibly rearranged. You know, if we start looking at heat risk, we just say that we might not play this game. If we don't play cricket in the rain, we might not play cricket in the future in the heat. Or we shift them to later in the day or a different time of day. Deterioration of cognitive function, brain function if that starts to go. Poorer individual performances, lower skill levels, more errors, shorter innings being played. Psychological fatigue, this isn't a decision that somebody makes, your motivation just drops, so it's much harder to play. Whether you're an elite athlete or a club cricketer, it's going to be harder for you to actually play. If you're a club cricketer, does that reduce your enjoyment? Do you just say, you know what, I'm not going to bother next season? What does that do for recruitment, for continuing to play cricket in future? Heat illness, more heat illness happening. You need to respond to that, and potentially medical interventions if heat stroke occurs. And let's remember, we're not just talking about elite cricket. You know, I'm talking about first-class level elite cricket a fair bit. But translate this into recreational cricket. Translate this into getting young people playing the game as well. You know, if they're not feeling good playing the game, why would they want to continue? And what impacts does that have moving forward for the game? By countries. Weave it over. We'll get there. Impacts on countries. So going up to this bigger scale. So India, you recognise this now. So 1900 moving up to the present day. So long periods of droughts, hot temperature days are increasing. The trend has been increasing over recent decades. Different parts of the country have got 6 days more or 8 days more, but many more very hot days. Higher maximum temperatures. Average over the last century or so, 41, 42, recently up to 45. This year got up to 51 in Delhi, matched the record from 2016. Rainfall and floods as well. Increased likelihood of cloudbursts, flash floods. So 4 days ago, this happened at a Hindu temple in a campsite. Just a sudden downpour of rain. Rocks, water went through a campsite with 25 tents in, 16 people dead, 65 injured, 40 people missing. This was 4 days ago. So look, we've been talking about cricket, a game that we all love, but these are genuine impacts of climate change. We're talking about lives. So I don't want to dwell on that bit, but we need to think about that element as well. This was just 2 days ago. The monsoon rains are so heavy, and apologies, I can't remember the name of the town, and it hasn't come up on my notes. The monsoon rains are so heavy they had to open a dam further upstream because that dam would have broken. That would have been catastrophic for this town. The alternative was to open the dam and manage the flood, and that's what they've had to do. This is just 2 days ago. Now, it used to be when I was doing talks, maybe 18 months ago, I would be looking for weather-related stories. I would be actively looking, and maybe over a 2-week period I'd find 3 or 4 or 5. On the India Today TV, just for one day this week, there were 8 stories that were weather-related. Severe impacts. This stuff is happening, and yet, governments aren't seriously talking about it, or not as seriously as they should be. But what about cricket? Okay, in some ways it feels a little bit trivial and a little bit churlish to now focus cricket, but let's move on to cricket, that's what we have to talk about. Typically August to May they play. Likely they're going to have to shorten the season, because April and May is going to become unplayable very, very soon. 2018 in Kerala, all 14 of the major cricket grounds are affected by floods, but also 400 people died and 1 million people displaced. So again, balance, but we'll focus on the cricket. 2016, a drought in Maharashtra, 13 IPL matches had to be moved. A lawsuit was... It takes millions of litres of water to water an outfield to get it into a playable condition. People were dying during this flood. Farmers were committing suicide, people were dying because they didn't have food. So the court ruled that 3 clubs in Mumbai, Nagpur and Pune could not water their pitches. Now, if you can't water a cricket pitch, you really can't play on it. So they had to shift all of their operations out of state to complete that season. This one's more about air quality than climate change per se, but this is India, Sri Lanka in December 2017 from memory, and the air quality was just so bad. 4 suspensions of play in one day. Sri Lanka could only field 9 players at one point. They had oxygen canisters on the boundary rope and in the up in the changing rooms. Bowlers were bowling 2 overs before they went off to get oxygen because the air quality was so poor. So direct impacts on a top-level match. South Africa, wheat bit bleached out. Again, you see the trends. Temperatures are increasing. January 2018, Cape Town, you may remember this from the news, Cape Town was facing day 0 where the city would run out of water. Residents were allowed no more than 50 litres a day. Australia turned up for a tour. They were advised only 2 minutes in the shower. Not too much of a hardship, but... later that year, the final of the domestic one-day cup, in contrast, was cancelled because of heavy rain. And club and school cricket cancelled because of droughts. The pitches are just baked. It was like playing on concrete and it was just too dangerous to play, so no club cricket and no school cricket. Australia, almost identical, increasing temperatures. In the HIP6 reports, they reported 2019, 8 out of 10 hottest years in Australia occurred since 2005. 200 temperature records broken in 2018-2019. Highest temperature 49.3. Predictions Adelaide and Perth could see 60% increase in days over 40 degrees C by 2030. Sydney and Melbourne projected to be hitting 50 degrees C at some point in the near future. These are crazy temperatures. And of course we've had the recent flooding in Sydney, Brisbane and down the east coast. 2017, New South Wales Premier League, formerly the Sydney Grey Cricket, was completely cancelled. And this was attributed directly to climate change. Summers are now 50 times more likely to have these massive heat events than previously. 2018-19, following year, under 15 national championships were shortened because of heat issues, so impacts. This is a representation of the wildfires. It's an artist's impression, it's not a genuine satellite picture. Sorry, it's slightly faded a bit there, but there were wildfires all over Australia. We all saw it in the news. Massive impacts. The next picture is slightly gruesome, so anybody who doesn't like things like that, maybe don't look, but it's not just people that are being impacted by this. Wildlife, animals, millions of animals killed in those wildfires. It's a huge impact on the environment as well. Switch over to tennis just for a moment. Tennis players, one player scared she would collapse because of the unhealthy air quality. Matches cancelled because of the air quality, but also rain. And Liam Brodie, a British player who did quite well at Wimbledon actually, but he tweeted that during the wildfires, the air quality was so bad, they received an email from the ATP and the Australian Open. He said it's a slap in the face. They told them the conditions were playable, but were they healthy? Citizens of Melbourne would want to keep their animals indoors the day he played his qualifying match. They're expected to go outside and exercise intensely. So people weren't allowed to walk their dogs, but elite tennis players were playing tennis in that air quality. What are we doing to our players? There's got to be some regulation around this. And wildfires were cancelling cricket matches as well because of the air quality. Now, Joe Root, most of you may have heard of Joe Root batting Sydney 2019, January 2019 I think it was. Hottest temperature in Sydney for 70 years was 47.3 degrees outside the stadium. Joe Root batted for 6 hours. Now apparently he had a virus at the time anyway, so that's going to make him more susceptible to some of these impacts. He batted for 6 hours in full kit. 47.3 degrees centigrade outside. They put a thermometer in the middle at lunchtime. In the middle, it was 57.6 degrees centigrade. I'll say it again because it's true. 57.6. And he batted through that. He spent the night in hospital, being rehydrated and recovering. Again, what are we expecting our players to do? Should there be rules around heat? Fans were looking for any shade they could get. This is where the shade of the pole for the floodlights was, and some of them were just flaked out at the back of the stadium. It's just so hot. West Indies, you see that trend now. In September 2017, unprecedented, 3 Category 5 hurricanes all at the same time coming across the West Indies. Never had 3 at the same time, ever before. All Category 5. And then a 4th one came, Hurricane Maria. This is Dominica, and up here you'll see winds apart after Hurricane Maria had gone through. So a lovely international cricket round beforehand and hammered by a hurricane coming through. More frequent, more powerful, more damage. Sunny England and Wales. Same trends. The trend is going up for us as well. Right now, in fact I heard on the news as I was coming down, Met Office has extended the amber weather warning. It's extending from Sunday into Monday now that we're going to get high temperatures. From Sunday into Monday, temperatures likely to be in excess of 35 degrees, and certainly in the southeast. Some models producing maximum temperatures in excess of 40 degrees for this weekend, possibly. They think that's unlikely, but it might happen this weekend. Interesting, on the Met Office website, under a heading of "Is this climate change?" effectively, I can't remember the exact heading. Extreme heat events do occur with natural climate variation due to changes in global weather patterns. However, the increase in frequency, duration, and intensity of these events over recent decades is clearly linked to the observed warming of the planet and can be contributed to human activity. Very, very clearly put up on the Met Office website. Slightly tongue-in-cheek, this was put into the Hit for 6 report. So on the 19th of July 2018, due to abnormally warm temperatures, the MCC has decided to dispense with the requirement for gentlemen to wear jackets in the pavilion and to arrive wearing one. Now, apparently, the day before, didn't have to wear your jacket, or you had to have your jacket with you. So this is an improvement that comes up. They put this out on Twitter. This wasn't during your time, was it? No, it wasn't. They put this out on Twitter. The responses are absolutely hilarious if you find humour in sort of some bits of climate change. Climate change is real. This is definitive proof. Point of no return. Civilised society is breaking down. Who knew global warming could be this bad? Global warming 1, MCC 0. Time to dust off my MCC mankini. Nobody wants to see that from MCC members. But look, it looks slightly tongue-in-cheek, but, you know, English society moves on. We have to take in climate change as well. 2018, joint hottest summer on record for the UK, but the hottest ever for England. 30 times more likely to have that heat than with climate change than previously. We now think heat waves with temperatures above 35 degrees will happen on average every other year. 2030, daily summer temperatures could be 4 degrees warmer than previous averages and 5 degrees warmer by 2050 for the UK. The hottest day ever recorded in England, 25th of July 2019, it reached 38.7 degrees in Cambridge. England were playing a test match on that day. It was at Lord's. I was there. It was damn hot. England were playing Ireland, the first time Ireland had ever played at Lord's, their first test match at Lord's. On that day, we had 182 medical referrals from the spectators for heat-related illnesses. So not just, you look a bit hot, sit in the shade, medical referrals to see a doctor or go to hospital. Open stands in that sort of temperature. So it's not just the players. There's a responsibility to the spectators, to the stand as well. 2019 World Cup, one day was 34 degrees. That was a hot day. But the first week of the 2019 World Cup, there were 3 rain-affected matches and one was cancelled. Officially, it's the most disrupted Cricket World Cup in the history of Cricket World Cups, because you had odd weather, rain at the beginning, heat at the end. And some of the other impacts, and this is from the report, so it is from 2019. 6 of the 7 wettest years in UK history occurred since 2000. 27% of England's home ODIs since 2000 been replayed with reduced overs with Duckworth-Lewis. Rain-affected ODIs have doubled in England since 2011. This was Glamorgan. 5 of their 7 T20 blast matches that year were curtailed or cancelled because of rain. They're still feeling the effects of this because the fans are not pre-buying tickets anymore. They decide on the day if they want to go because they don't trust the weather. How do you plan? How do you buy in your catering materials? How do you run a business doing that? It's had knock-on effects. They lost £1 million. Projected £1 million. 5 of the last 10 years, at least 175 days, 16,000 overs of county championship cricket have been lost because of weather impacts. Now look, county cricket's always been impacted by weather, but it's increasing. That's the point, the trends are increasing. And this is Dan Cherry, Head of Operations at Glamorgan. Climate change is becoming a huge factor. We've got to take it seriously. We're all fundamentally to the game. The less cricket we play, the fewer people will watch, the less they'll come to the ground, pay to enter, less chance for young people to be inspired. That's what it comes down to for the sport. Look, all sorts of other impacts we've touched on. That's what it comes down to for the sport. I'll do this quick. I've realised, apologies, I have gone over. Should have edited slightly better. This was a recommendation and advice from the report. Please take a look at the report if you want to see more detail. We need heat rules to include hydration breaks and cooling breaks. Cricket Australia already has this. We need to adopt it, and particularly for younger players. Player testing and heat acclimatisation. Longer tours, already mentioned that one. But test players for their response to heat as well. You know, it might affect selection potentially. Clothing and equipment. Adjust playing regulations. Maybe allow shorts, possibly. But develop equipment for greater airflow to reduce those temperatures. This is on a broader sort of countrywide level. Look at participation levels. People just not playing cricket anymore. Why might that be? Is it weather related? Worsening weather, is that causing fewer people to play? Look at political risk. You know, water. Look at the India example. Using water to water a cricket pitch when farmers can't irrigate crops. There's political issues here. You need to be able to understand what those risks are. Check air quality at grounds. Review cricket infrastructure. Look at lots of cricket stadia are built close to the sea. So look at sea level rise, storm surges, flooding, structural surveys, protection of spectators as well. So look at our structures. And there was a proposal for some kind of global disaster fund to help out countries that are being impacted. Advice, only 3 points here, I'll not through these quickly. To go up to national boards, full country by country analysis of climate change risk, and then create an action plan. Eliminate cricket's contribution to climate change before the 2027 World Cup, so they put in a date, a recommendation for a date. And then provide a climate change education programme for players, for administrators, for anybody involved in sports. I've gone slightly over, my apologies, but I hope we can have a discussion now. I'm happy that we don't necessarily curtail it, but understood if anybody needs to leave at 8:30, but thank you very much.
Does anyone have a questions?
Oh, it had to be. Go on, David.
Russell, good to see you. Thank you very much. Right at the beginning, you said cricket's about to do something about it, but it's a bit tardy. I wondered, do you mean English cricket, or do you mean Australian cricket, global cricket? Why has it taken cricket so long? And I suspect, correct me if I'm wrong, but India in particular is not even in the starting blocks on this. And what should we be doing?
The sort of a question I greatly appreciate you asking me that one, but it's a difficult one to answer, isn't it? I was referring to English cricket. ECB have appointed a sustainability manager working centrally at ECB in the facilities department. So she's getting up to speed. She's been in post approaching, I think, about 8-9 months now, and is working with councils and other venues to look at the programme for cricket. Internationally, I'm not as clear on what's happening, but Cricket Australia has got in heat rules. But my understanding is I don't know of any other board that has any other requirements around any other sustainability issues. Why not? I look at beggars belief, frankly. If this was any other kind of risk, if this was a financial risk, it would have been on the risk register years ago, with people talking about this at all levels. Because it's something that's a bit sciencey and a bit difficult and we don't really understand it, it's not been talked about. So I don't have a direct answer for that. In terms of what we do about it, we need to talk about it. I think fans need to be talking about it. I think, we're doing some really good work here. Will and Neil and others at this club are starting to do things. Glamorgan are doing work. I did lots of work at Lords. Surrey have just appointed their first sustainability manager. You've got operations managers like Dan at Glamorgan that are starting to talk about these issues, starting to talk to their fans, their spectators that are coming in. We've just got to talk about this sort of stuff and get it in context. So yes, we've got the tragedies I mentioned in terms of life, but you've got to make it relevant to people, because climate change can look like something that is just too big. And when I do a talk in equal measure, now bearing in mind most people don't actually come up to and give you feedback, but sort of the 10%, the tails of the curve will give you feedback. Half of them tell me you didn't say it strongly enough. You need to be more direct, you need to talk about this. So that's why I put in some of those sort of tragic photos. The other half kind of say, I'm just so depressed now. This is such a big issue. There's nothing I can do about it. So you've got to kind of strike that balance, and we just got to understand that there is something that everybody can do. And for me, the key thing that you can do is actually talk about this, have these conversations. If you go to them, look, Tanya, you said you, I'll use the word inspired, but you wanted to get in contact and you found me. Because of what you saw at a match, the amount of waste that was there. Well, anybody going to a match, if you see waste, or if you see other opportunities, talk to the club. If you play recreational cricket, actually say to your club, well, why are we using single-use plastic, or who do we actually have our our energy, where do we get our electricity from? Is it a renewable supply? Let's just start asking these questions. But there does need to be a policy level. There needs to be something at ICC that looks at this. It's a risk for the global game. Sorry, really long answer. I hope it partly answered the question.
Yeah.
About what you said earlier on about the difference in language between economic growth and economic activity.
Yep.
There does seem to be more of a consensus among academics shifting towards the idea that we can't tackle climate change without the transition away from growth.
Yep.
Finite management. So how does this impact particularly more and more at the elite professional level? Clubs are operating as businesses and they are operating, looking at financial risk. If we are going to move to a society that is anti-growth or degrowth, how will sport look? How will it change? Will it be able to continue at all in the way that it does after? Sorry, that's really...
No, that's another big one. There's only very few sports in the world that are these kind of mammoth brands, and you're probably looking at the English Premier League football, Bundesliga and Serie A and Spain and Italy. You're looking at things like National Football League and Major League Baseball and the American sports. Most sports are actually played with very little funding. I was talking to somebody from England Netball the other day who was explaining to me, and I was surprised by this, I was naive on this. I thought that netball had gone professional. Most of our netballers, performing at elite level, they're still teachers or nurses or whatever else. So most sport doesn't necessarily fit into that high economic value necessarily, and is quite underinvested in this. A lot of the time it's people's passion that are pushing them forward, whether you're a participant or a coach or whatever. So it doesn't necessarily fit in there, but to your point in terms of growth, I'm not an economist. Having said that, I spend more time reading books about the economy than I do about the environment nowadays, because I want to try and understand that, because you're not going to affect the political level these sorts of things unless you do work on that. I don't think it would be a bad thing if we pulled back on some of the salaries that we see in these big sports. We think about English Premier League footballers getting huge salaries. We go and look at a quarterback paying for the top American football teams, or a baseball pitcher or something like that. Crazy money. Hundreds of millions of dollars for throwing a ball around. Sorry to trivialise it. There's a lot of enjoyment that goes around throwing a ball around, but where does value actually sit? For me, at the beginning of the first lockdown, we started to see where value really sits. And we started to look at our nurses and our doctors, and we started to look at the people cleaning the streets and providing all of those operations that we needed, the foundation of what makes our societies run, and we started valuing those people. As soon as we come out of that, we're back at looking at sort of economic elites, and we're not paying those people to support us. So sorry, that's maybe shoving it slightly in a political direction as well, but where does value lie in society? I think there are so many things that we may need to change around the economy, our politics, and the way we do things. But that's expanding our conversation hugely. But yeah, absolutely. I think some parts of sport maybe have to retract slightly.
What about transport?
Again, the big one.
Because it's not just the teams that travel.
Absolutely.
It's the fans that travel. So there's a huge movement of people, isn't there, for all these events?
If you look at any carbon footprint for most sports events or clubs, probably somewhere around 2/3 of it is related to spectator movement. Now, that's going to vary depending on the event, depending on various other things, but as a rule of thumb, it's about 60 to 70%. So it's huge. It's a difficult one, because when you're reporting your carbon footprint, who owns those emissions? Now, if the venue wasn't there putting on the event, they wouldn't have to travel. But if they weren't travelling, they might be at home watching the TV, they might be doing something else that uses energy. So it becomes really difficult. I'm not excusing this. I think the thing that has to happen for sport, we've got to look at our travel infrastructure. We've got to put in things that will encourage fans to travel in a different way.
I'm thinking about flights, really. I mean,
Flights in
instead of
particular.
travel within the UK is one thing, but when lots of people are getting on planes and following teams around the world, I think that becomes a different sort of issue, isn't it?
It is. If you're just flying to watch one match and coming back, I think that's difficult. You know, are we going to get to a point where society really does frown on that? Can you ban people from travelling to matches? I don't think it's an answerable question. I'm very happy somebody else to jump in on one, because you can see I'm floundering this on that one. But no, look, I agree in principle, but it's a really difficult one to talk.
Yeah, so it may not be about banning people from travelling to matches, but where the match is being held, you can make decisions about that. So,
are you possibly thinking about the Istanbul when Man City played Liverpool in the European final and things like that? Baku, apologies.
could be that.
Should have looked straight at you, don't you know?
Yeah, cricket in the golf.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, MCC play their pre-season match. Used to be at Lords, and now play it in over in the UEA.
And what's the logic behind that?
Neil, do you know? I don't know. No, I won't put you on the spot on that one. Sorry, Neil's a former MCC employee as well, and I know him from days back there. But...
that reason was the first class cricket season started earlier and earlier. They were pushing the championship to the margins of the English summer, if you like. And MCC wanted to continue with that fixture. He also did use that to trial some things within the game. For example, paintball came from that fixture, which has done some good. But yeah, it's essentially because the first class cricket season started beginning of April, which didn't used to happen.
Yeah.
And say I find both your two questions, those are the kind of questions that sometimes make me think, just like you said at the very beginning, actually we shouldn't be playing any sport, because it all just seems to be so difficult to manage. And how do you balance players who have a very small window to earn money of, what, say 10 years, and they've been given a franchise opportunity and they decide they're going to play 5 franchise competitions a year? How are you going to say to them, no, you can't do that because your climate footprint's too large? And then, yeah, I just find the whole thing really, really difficult to balance in my mind.
I agree. It's so complex as to how this works. I think there can be a focus on sport because it's public. Elite sport. That's the whole point of it. It's there to be consumed by the general public. So it's got to be there. It's got to be spectacular. That implies that the top, whatever it is, 0.5%, 0.1% of people playing these sports actually have to compete against others at a similar level of skill. You've got to move around the world. You've got to do that. We accept that for the players. What do we do in terms of spectators? There's been conversations around, certainly through lockdown, we had in fact there's something on the BBC Sport website called BBC Sport 2050, and about 4 experts, 2 of whom are in the room today, myself, David, are involved, and 2 academics from the US. We projected what we thought sport might look like in 30 years' time, based on our knowledge from now. One of the suggestions in that was some kind of hologram projection. Look, it's come true with ABBA in London, hasn't it? Hologram projection. Somebody told me the other day, I've just seen that ABBA thing and you can't tell it's not real people on the stage. Look, I'm not suggesting this isn't necessarily, but could we see a test match being played in Melbourne is projected onto this pitch out here and you've got fans sat here watching it almost as live? I don't know. Is technology going to get there? We're going to remove that need.
Good example, just as a back that would be, sorry, I'm Will, by the way, I'm stuck here as well. But the players playing abroad, so 10 years ago, the players had to get clearances from their counties or even Welsh Cricket Board to go and play overseas in tournaments. So 12 requests went through 10 years ago. We're up to about 120 now, I think, a year. So in 10 years, it is literally multiplied by 10 in terms of players. Because, to be fair, then that's their living. They've got a short career, they want to earn money as quickly as possible. But also, part of the thing we do at the club is we are signatories for United Nations Sports for Climate Action and Race to Zero. Race to Zero, both measure your greenhouse gas emissions, your carbon footprint and things. Race to Zero is more onerous than most because it does sort of, it's quite strict targets. But going back to travel and travel teams, travel of visiting teams, travel of spectators is a massive issue. Because if you're the IOC, and you're looking to put on Paris, 2024, and you're looking to have the greenest Olympics ever taken place, and you're looking at thinking, I don't want to sign up to Race to Zero. They have, I think, in the end, but they didn't want to for a long time because they're looking at it thinking, how do I measure to start with? And secondly, how on earth do I influence a lot of these things, and that's one of the challenges with these frameworks. You know, some of us are signed up to. In my view, you're better off signing up for it and trying your best than not signing up at all. But there's a lot of organisations, sporting clubs and global organisations that are a bit nervous about these things because it's all these uncontrollables, which are not completely uncontrollables, but you've got a very small element of control on which really impact what you do.
Good. There was one in front, and then
I was just going to say, high-level sport, I mean, it's all about consumerism, isn't it, really, for the masses? And wouldn't it be better if we just spent more energy in sport, getting people to actually play it locally, and never mind going off around the world? I'm not saying that to you, I'm just...
Yeah, throwing it into the room.
If we're trying to look at what the world's going to look like in the future, you know, we just can't continue the way we are. By everything being turned into a big, you know, consumerist. It's all about big business, isn't it? And it's not really what engages young people in actually playing the sport. And that's what people need to do. The people, ordinary people and kids just need to play more sport locally, don't they? Keep it more in the countries where you are, in your own environment. Like it used to be 100 years ago. Not that I'm that old, guys.
Completely agree. I mean, I think there needs to be elite level sport for people to aspire to, but look, the majority of young people don't necessarily play the biggest sports, you know, rugby, cricket, football. You know, a lot of them are, I don't know, you know, canoeing or table tennis or whatever else, just because they enjoy it and they've been introduced to it at a young age through a family member, through a friend or whatever. And that, we need to encourage that. We need to encourage its physical activity. And I think a lot of young people now, it's not suddenly they find one sport and they're passionate about it. They'll play one sport one weekend and another sport another weekend. So to actually change our thoughts around physical activity and how you participate in that, you know, a lot of individual sport is going on now. You know, so many more people have come away from team sport because of the pandemic and they're doing individual. So the whole area is changing. I had David and then I'll come back over there if that's okay.
Following up from what you're saying, it'd be nice to take to the streets a little our dojo friends do that already, play cricket in a lot of places that the same climate change is in cricket, which is brilliant. But I'm just thinking about the Keep Sundays special movement that's come up, where you can actually clear the street and kids can play.
Yeah.
Perhaps with soft balls or sticker balls or something, so they don't break them on windows. But you know, let's get those kids out on the street playing cricket, pretending that they're the elite athletes and not necessarily ever going to be in that team. It might be nice, but you know, more just for the joy of the game, and then they can enjoy watching the good stuff on the telly. Or in the hologram, all of that is possible.
And that's how you get young people playing in the first place, who then might become the greatest batsman England's ever seen, or whatever it might be.
One of the ways we can do this is by batting down the cars. Keep Sunday Special does that. I really like this movement.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I think really good points about cars and streets. I mean, I think one of the main reasons that people are exercising the kids playing their sport is the motor car, and just a complete, you know, people walking, people cycling. I mean, I'm slightly wary about things were better 100 years ago, certainly in the world of sport, where actually most people were excluded from playing sport. So, slightly. But I think we should have rose-tinted spectacles about it. One very tiny thought, as a sort of positive contribution. I'm really interested to know what Will thinks about this, but in the Bundesliga in Germany, your ticket to a football game is not only local public transport free, but now regional public transport free. So, you know, you can be coming from 120 miles. So, you know, which is a big part often of the crowd is travelling not just from the city, but from the wider region. And I just wonder, you know, that seems to me like a no-brainer in commercial sport. You put on the spectacle, you know, people are going to come. You've got to cover the public transport costs, and that may be something you also do with local government and with central sports agencies. But it just seems to me that's like we should be, you know, I mean, and certainly the Premier League, and you know, let's start with where there's real money. So the Premier League, all football really, Test matches, World Cups, international matches in cricket, like that just seems, shouldn't that just be the norm?
Well, 100 years ago, people couldn't fly around the world willy-nilly in big herds, could they?
So.
100 years ago, people couldn't fly around the world willy-nilly in big herds like they do.
Sure, I was just
Football
thinking
matches
about
and all.
participation in exercise.
Yeah.
Do they have privatised public transport? Because that's such a huge barrier here, is that
Sure.
the cost of privatised public transport is,
Sure.
yeah,
And that's-
ridiculous.
Yeah, it'd be nice if trains were cheaper, because they are, you can get lots more people per unit of travel onto a train. And I actually wondered, when people go to see elite sport in another country, how about if they have a kind of buddying up system of members of the public who live there and, kind of go for a week and come on holiday, find out what it's like to live there, be part of that journey and stay, and that's their holiday, not just then go off and do a fortnight in somewhere else. So that's one less plane that year.
And it's
those
more,
ideas.
and more value in that one trip. If you're just going for one day, a football match and possibly an overnight, and you're coming back, what a carbon footprint doing that. But go for a longer period, fewer flights, fewer times, greater value.
Some do the week-long acclimatisation games and be part of the journey.
Yeah.
Russell, I was just going to say, David, about your question about the Bundesliga. I think one of your basis winners last year, it was a local football club, and they were giving people cheaper tickets, weren't they, if they'd cycled there?
You got a benefit. So Shoreham FC, a non-league club, if you cycled or walked to the venue, you got in at a lower ticket price.
I think these things are happening, but just a bit popular. Oh, sorry, Will, you were going to say something.
No, not specifically. I was just going to, David sort of hooked me into that question to a certain extent. I think it's a really good idea. I mean, we've tried stuff in the past where if you've had your ticket around the big matches where we've had to use park and ride, we don't want to be using any form of transport in that sense, but we've given people free park. We picked up the cost effectively as a club for the park and ride. So you come along with your ticket to the match and you get your park and ride free. And we've looked at other things where we're trying to work with SAS trams and stuff like that. But to us, very parochial, very local. We've got a derelict being refurbished train station just over the back of the ground, which to many of you is closer than St John's Wood is to Lords, which is probably the most iconic sort of community in cricket. And Ian and I met with them 2-3 years ago about exactly the stuff. How can we, as and when it opens up, how can we support it, to promote it to our spectators that are coming in, but also are there things we can start to do that tie into that? So if they're putting on extra services, they're going to want to make their money, because you're right, they're privatised and things that go with it, but who bears the cost and where and how we do it? And I love that sort of Shoreham idea of the discount based on your behaviours is a really nice thing to try and drive. It can be good, make sure it's inclusive for all, but because clearly some people don't have any option to come by car, but they're cracking ideas if you can do them. And I don't see any reason why we've come close, we've skirted around the edges, but we've probably not been consistent in that here. But I think it's a lovely idea.
Yeah. Got another one there?
I was just going to contribute to that as well. I'm Lily, I'm the Green Councillor for this area, and not only do I have the cricket club in my ward, I also have the football pitch, the roads. So I deal with a lot of big sporting related travel in and out of Bishopston, and I think the more and more of the things that we're discussing and would love to see are hitting the problem of a central government block, which is really, really frustrating for everyone involved. It's not just transport and privatisation of transport and funding to local councils. It's also, when we come back to it, it's climate change at its heart as well. It is absolutely should be done. If cricket clubs should decarbonise, football clubs should. Even if they did, we're still looking at, I believe, it's 2.9 degrees warming by 2050 just from international targets right now, or we want 1.5. Even if every single one of us in this room, we're in the city, managed to go carbon neutral, it still wouldn't be enough. So I think, while it's great that we're discussing all of this, everything that we are talking about, it's this final problem of why isn't our national government doing enough? And what can we as an organisation or as individuals do about that?
That's so fundamental. I think we were having a conversation earlier around politics, and I think I'm right in saying that if you if you just take the policies of the main parties, and I'm including the Green Party and main parties here, if you just take the policies and you show them to people, the party that would be in government is the Green Party. As soon as you introduce the names onto these things, suddenly it's, well, the Green Party are unelectable, so I won't vote for them. I've got to vote for Labour or Conservative, and Conservatives are going to reduce my taxes, and you know, all these other preconceptions come into it. So there is a whole discussion around our politics and approaches, but fundamentally people are good and they know what we should be doing, but it's getting into that context, isn't it? Getting into that bigger political context, and sport can do that if we start influencing on these things. 1, 2, 3, that's all right, and David as well.
I'm actually going to steal Neil's question from last time, is how do you feel about all the activism you're seeing on pitches? So there's Just Stop Oil who've tied themselves to goalposts, there is youngsters running onto the Formula One and getting in the way. So,
Tour de France yesterday, people getting on and being dragged off. Can I answer that kind of off the record in a personal capacity? Look, I mean, genuinely it's a difficult one. You've got to highlight these things. You've got to draw it to people's attention. So, yes, I agree with the fundamental point. But does our media put that point across and explain why these things are done? Or does the media just say, excuse my language, I don't mean this to sound offensive in any way to anybody, but, you know, look at these stupid, greeny, tree hugger types ruining our matches. That puts a lot of people off. It's really difficult. I mean, look, XR, when the first actions by XR were reported quite positively, and I loved it. I loved seeing it. And I've been involved in XR to a small extent. I've not done a huge amount of XR. But it was reported quite positively. That big action with the pink vote and all the rest of it. The second major action, the BBC had switched against it and was starting to report it of the, you know, crusty tree huggers, all that sort of stupid language, when in fact it's doctors, it's lawyers, it's sensible, normal, intelligent people who know these are big issues.
I was assisting an old lady of 90-something who was changed. She was glued to the Home Office revolving doors with 3 nappies on, so that she could stay there as long as possible. And I was her coffee runner and talker.
Absolutely.
She was blinking retired professor, not with a head-crusted, whatever it was Boris called it, ribbon. I'm a nurse, by yeah.
Absolutely.
She reported much better, and I had police people laughing and crying and chatting to me about this whole issue, and it wasn't reported like that at all sometimes. No. I think the Guardian were kind, but I think some of the other press, and particularly the television press, were terrible.
I had an awful Daily Mail article written about me.
Well done. I'm proud of you. Daily Mail just don't matter. It doesn't matter.
But I think that there is an issue there. On a personal level, I think we need to draw attention to these issues as much as we possibly can. On a societal level, the media doesn't help. It's too easy just to have a soundbite and disregard what are the most fundamental issues that we have.
Do you expect the media to do any report in any other way, though? You'd be naive if you expect the media to report.
Well,
not but it's
no, you look at the way, you look at the papers, their political viewpoint, you're naive if you expect them to. It's like general politics, you know, they're never going to support the Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, the Times, Daily Express, Sun, News of the World, whatever it's called now. They're never going to support the Labour Party or the Green Party or Extinction Rebellion or Greenpeace or whatever. And so I think if you expect them to support that positive, you're very naive.
Were you going to say, Zena?
I was going to just get a gauge, because we've got 2 more things to cover. How many more questions have we got? One.
I've got one there and one there. Can I just do those 2?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I agree with your point, but then maybe we need to think about the actions. So yeah, it's just a way that these actions are reported. Please.
I was just going to follow on from what the Green Council has said and what others have said about the fact that normal people are standing up and using their power, their individual power, to try and have this message heard and to pressure on the government to do the right thing. When is sport going to do that? I know Dale Vince is trying really hard. There's a few others, but you know, you guys are doing a fantastic job, Will, and Gloucestershire, but you need to do more. And I would really encourage you to use your power, because you're in Bristol, and Bristol is racy. So yeah, I would encourage you to use your power and go further. And it is an emergency. So this is all wonderful chat. Where's the urgency? So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, agree. I think there's one at the back.
My question's for Will, sorry.
It's fine. It's fine.
I'm a life member of Gloucestershire, and I find myself watching less and less live cricket because of the weather. It's too hot for me here. Obviously I've got older, but there is no cover, and I just find that really difficult, and I find myself saying, no, I don't think I'll go today, it's too hot.
Yeah, look, I mean, it is hearing Russell talk earlier, you know, it is the most glaringly obvious thing about this ground at the moment is that we don't have a roof anywhere. We have plans to put one back in over here where there used to be one.
Many happy years in the
yeah, and we wanted to do, we looked and we've actually got some stuff which was quite clever, which was trying to be reclaimed timber, it was about reclaimed sailcloth, it was about using stuff that was, we could just like reusing things to do it. And you know, it comes with, I'm not going to lie, it comes with a price attached to it and quite a lot of work. And so that he absolutely wants to do it, and I think, you know, these conversations are always really helpful to sharpen your mind on what you can and what you can't do. We actually had a conversation hosting England and South Africa women here on Friday of this week, and we actually, and yesterday, were talking about provision of free sun cream and stuff like that. You know, what could we do, even at really short notice, knowing we were facing a really hot period of weather, to make sure people come as safely as possible. We can't send a magical roof up on there, but you know, we're trying to do what we can elsewhere. But certainly the lack of roof is noticeable here, and I think whether it's pouring with rain or it's very hot in either scenario, you want that cover and you don't have it.
Do you ever see the day when you'll have completely enclosed grounds, like a bit like centre court?
It's interesting. Do you know, I actually had a conversation with someone about 3 weeks ago. I think to do it over something the size of a cricket pitch would probably be an engineering feat of huge scale, because most football and most pitches are 4 sides and can close the gap a bit quicker, and cricket is a much bigger playing area. Somebody will do it in the future, definitely. And I think it'll be interesting to see what it then does to get in cricket. You know, a bit like Wimbledon, you play under a roof and suddenly you don't have the weather conditions impacting what the ball does, and cricket is quite dependent actually on weather in some respects, but actually how the ball moves in the air and how to play. But I do think it'll be done, and I was actually thinking the day that I would love to be involved in that project as and when it does occur, albeit you can imagine there'll be a lot of cost and labour and probably some fairly unpleasant materials being used to achieve that success. And
you probably save Lily's stress by her leaving before you say we're going to cover it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'll just say take a look at the BBC Sport 2050 webpage on the cricket dome in Melbourne when England play Australia in the first match under a cricket dome. Some interesting points in that one. It wasn't a positive experience in 30 years' time, put it that way. So it's been imagined that might happen at some point.
Were there any more questions? Or I think we're going to...
Just very briefly, just to respond to the lady here and her excellent points, and indeed the Green Council, about even if sport gets its act together, like the emergency is so great, like what difference? And I think the point of sport getting its act together is it can then speak authentically, you know, to the rest of society. And the real payoff is not Gloucester County Cricket Club reducing its carbon emissions by a bit. It's when someone like Tendulkar is speaking, you know, to 1 billion Indians saying, this is really important. at that point, the climate crisis, it becomes impossible for the sort of media tactics that are being used to say, don't think about it, it normalises it. All the folks who at the moment don't want to know, can't think about it. That's the real payoff, and not just sort of from individuals. I mean, I think one of the lessons of Black Lives Matter movement in football is that when all the footballers agree amongst themselves, we're going to do this and make this statement. They had the Prime Minister and Home Secretary on toast. They were unbeatable. People booed them, the Mail killed them, they won. And that's the potential, particularly in India and Pakistan, but here in Britain as well. And I'm just going to ask you, Russell, what's the news from the front line? Where are the cricketers stepping up on this issue, and what's the way in which they can be supported?
I wish I had a very positive answer to that one. I wasn't actually thinking of responding to what you were saying. I thought, no, I'm just going to let David go to a crescendo and we'll leave it there, because I was going to come back in with a slightly negative comment around it. I don't see many cricketers or sports people in general stepping into this. Now, that high-low video at the beginning, there were young ambassadors that were coming in. All those sports people you saw in that are young sports people coming through at the beginning of their sporting career. We've got Joe, forgive me, I've forgotten his surname, at Glamorgan. Cook. Yeah, Joe Cook at Glamorgan. He did his undergraduate degree on climate change in cricket, his project. And he's now actually effectively the sustainability advisor for Glamorgan. He's a professional cricket player and he's their sustainability advisor because he's taken this on board. We've had Joe Root, we've had a few players actually speak out about this, but there was a piece on the BBC website, again, BBC Sport. They actually have a sport and sustainability news editor, so that's why they've got so many sustainability stories on there. But Wimbledon did a piece around sustainability. You had Novak Djokovic, you had Nick Kyrgios, and you had our British player who did so well, Cam Norrie. All were on film saying the environment is so important, this is an emergency, we've got to do something, and Wimbledon's doing great work. And they are doing very good work, again, can improve. But 3 of the 4 men's singles semi-finalists, finalists were there making a statement on this. You couldn't get any more powerful than that. They should have had the women in there as well. It's the way it should have been more powerful, frankly. So yes, other sports need to be doing this and need to be talking about it. I don't think we're quite there. While we're being pushed by money rather than justice and climate and proper society, we're probably not going to be there. But somebody needs to be taking the stand on this, and sport is so powerful. I don't have an answer for this, but it's a risk to all of sport, whether it's an individual player or whether it's the actual matches that we're playing or the infrastructure as well. It's a risk and we should be dealing with it, and it beggars belief that we're not, frankly. So I've kind of brought that down from a positive point. But look, it's a plateau, it's a springboard that we need to jump upwards.
I was just going to say that there's Pat Cummins in Australia started that Cricket Climate Fund, and he's got quite a lot of players, and there's a Rachel Haynes, I think it's called, the Australian women's player, she's quite involved with that. And he's got quite a number of players on that. And obviously when Shane Warne spoke after Russ had that meeting with him, that got so many hits, that piece, when it was reported that he was worried about climate change. So I think that was a very important voice. And what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, in the IPL, there's one club, I can't remember which one, that have a sort of sustainability match. I think it's the one that Virat Kohli plays for. And they did... I think it's the Bangalore. I can't remember which one it is, but they kind of did little videos which were really powerful before this one game. I think it is kind of still one game, and it's because it's their green match, and they all wore a different jersey, which of course has it, thinking, God, why are you wearing it? Especially making a new jersey to play one game. But anyway, so I think it is there, and there are also Indian players who've expressed concern, particularly about air pollution.
Sky did a 15-minute documentary called Cricket's Climate Crisis, and the England ladies team came out. They said they were playing in Australia at the time of the wildfires, and just to see that devastation really brought it home to them. So some of the England ladies team have spoken about this publicly,
It's going to be hot on Friday, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. And they've definitely realised that England women have definitely led the way in terms of professional international cricket.
Yeah.
And we're very clear, just little things like, we used to get these massive deliveries that come through whenever England played, men or women, loads of plastic bottles that would end up in a locker somewhere, and we'd find them 2 years later and they're all out there, whatever it was, water, Lucozade. And actually England women have been very clear, they're the first to really adopt the whole sort of, no, we're not going to do that, we want stuff that can be refilled, can be reused, and all these little things like that, which sound tiny, but they then become those. Sophie Eccleston was on the film with Milo, who's probably the best bowler arguably in the world at the moment, professional. He's going to send me spin bowling.
I think they were trying to. I know that what's it called when you try and mitigate your footprint. I can't think what the word's called. Offsetting. I know that's quite controversial, but they were trying to offset their tour, their Ashes tour, or their trip to Australia. I can't remember what they were doing. Was it before the World Cup in the winter? I don't know where it got to exactly, but they were looking at offsetting. So they definitely are more driven of the 2 English teams anyway.
We were actually going to let Will tell us a little bit about what you're doing here.
I will give you 2 minutes. I promise you 2 minutes. I appreciate that. So, it's interesting talking about best cricket moments earlier. Actually, I thought 3, not best ones, sadly, but here you talk about it. First year I started work, it was actually before I started the job. I went to the Cheltenham Cricket Festival, which is actually starting for us next week. And I turned up because we were playing Kent, and there was a guy playing for Kent called Brendan Ash, and he retired on 199 not out. I think that one run away for a double century because he couldn't cope with his heat exhaustion. He was battling all day, and he just got to the point where you could almost see him sort of swaying, just everything had gone, and he straight off, and that was it. Mentioned Men's Cricket World Cup earlier, 2019, we hosted 3 matches in that, 2 of them got written off completely in that game. And talking also about the kit, interesting sort of where the challenges arise. We're about to get a new sort of edict, quite right to say, around players playing concussion injury, where they're going to make them wear neck protectors at the back of their helmets, which is entirely right. It's about keeping these people safe. But it's an extra layer of probably quite a thick material that's going to sit at the back of someone's neck, or there's a few areas which is, especially in that helmet's compulsory, a few areas where you can actually get a bit of breathing going on through your skin, and something that's going to be covered as well. So you just think, world's heating up, more kit to keep them safe, both completely, got to find a way to work together, but that's going to be quite challenging for players to come through, definitely. Look, I mean, thank you for tonight. Thank you for coming along. I know this is sort of with a few talks in there. Really appreciate it, and I said some great stuff. And I was an occasional participant in one of Dr. Russell's sort of sessions that Basis did, some of the training they did for people from across the game. It's interesting with people setting up ethical, environmentally sustainable sort of sports manufactured clothing. We had people from Chelsea Football Club from memory, guys from Canada dialing in, someone else from Australia, and myself, and that was really useful. But this stuff is so powerful when you see it, especially the sort of the graphs. I think always is really, really powerful. But I'm definitely the fraud in the room, is what I say. You guys do no more than we do. You're doing loads more than we are, and I know certainly you guys are leading the charge internationally. What I say from our point of view is that we are learning. We are unashamedly learning. We've gone out with some real clear intents. We've signed up to things which are, scary on one level and but inspiring in others. And my request for tonight would be, I'd love if you guys, if you've got ideas, if you've got things you see that we're not quite right on, or you think I've read about this and heard about that, I'd love to see them do that. Come and tell us, come and knock on our door, because, we are doing things sort of slightly piecemeal, as I said to Russell earlier. We think, we want to get some electrical vehicle charging points in. We've put 13 in the ground now, which is a huge number compared to most of the workforces or car parks in any form of employment, setting sports grounds. We're hanging on the coattails of Forest Green Road, so we've got a burgeoning and strengthening relationship with a lot of stuff we do here. We've got the solar panels on the roof, we've got electric motors which we use out here now. All our electricity comes from offshore wind farms, effectively in the North Sea. water refill, well, we haven't got loads of stuff everywhere, but it's readily available on bars and things good. But we need help, we need support, we need people at basis to sort of help us on the way when members of them. We need someone to keep writing that stuff, and we need all your ideas basically. Because I do firmly believe, we talked a bit around what's the purpose of sport and clubs. I don't know, some of you may know the B Corp Foundation and sort of what they do, purpose for profit, and there's lots of great organisations that kind of them. That is what I believe, and I'm nearly the other guys here tonight believe that's our responsibility. You are lucky working in sport, and that you do get column inches in papers that many other organisations that are bigger and arguably more worthy do better things don't get. And actually we've got to reflect the society and the community we represent, and particularly here in Bristol and across all of the southwest of England really. All of the councils declared for climate emergency. I live in Bath, and that's something they've very clearly come out with. We know that's true local here as well. We've got to be as a representative for ourselves because we believe in it, but also for the communities we serve. So I think that's at the heart of our driving force, and I long believe, and have still continue to believe, if we get that purpose bit right, and it's not just the people coming through the door, it's a workforce that are here, it's the communities that maybe we don't come through the door, but we want them to come through the door. It's a bigger thing about social responsibility as well as environmental responsibility. If we get that right, cynically, commercially, then more people will come because they will feel at home here, they'll feel welcome here, they'll feel like it's somewhere where we represent the values of those communities. That's what we're trying to do. What I would say is we're in the foothills, and the stuff we're missing, the stuff we're getting right, there's probably more. We're not necessarily wrong, but we haven't even started with yet. So, I'm really pleased we've been able to host this talk. So it's been an absolute honour and privilege to thank you for stepping up. I can't tell you how much we appreciate you doing that. But please talk to us, please keep talking to us, please keep pushing us, Michelle, and just keep on at us because we want to get this right. Because if we can get our players talking about it, if we can talk about it as a club. And I've been hassling the England Cricket Board for a long time now about they need to sign up to these United Nations Sports for Climate Action. They need to sign up to Race to Zero. It's not something to be afraid of, it's something to be excited about. And I think that's what we've bought in with. And we've got to get everyone else to do that because when they start doing it, others will follow. All these things, whether you're talking about inclusivity of grounds, whether you're talking about where you're sourcing the food from, and sustainability around land, food offering, all these things just need one to start doing it, and then the rest will come because you either do it because you're positive about it, or you do because you want to get left, left behind. And at the moment, we've got to pull some people up by our bootstraps, I think probably ourselves as well. But I could press on for hours because there was so much stuff in there that I heard. I thought, that's amazing, I'll write this down. I know where I'm getting my next pair of trainers from. And all this stuff. Clearly I'm not allowed in Lords anyway, so I don't wear my jacket or tie, but yeah, thank you, and please keep talking to us, and really appreciate it.
So, that has been so much to take in. And thank you both for coming and your contributions over the years. There is one last thing, but before I close with so the Extinction Rebellion Cricket Club, where the dodos kind of were hatched, we submitted several short stories to the Wisdom in 2020 when there was no cricket. So I'll read one of those. But I suppose to kind of bring all these things together, we've taken in quite a lot today, and actually just to remind everyone in the room that you will feel some kind of emotion about what you've seen today. It will strike your heart. You'll feel either despair or hope or angry or whatever you're feeling. It's completely all right to just feel those things, and hopefully we're trying to organise people in the room, if you want to sign up to an organisation that is going to use these as a springboard to bring together cricket communities to talk about climate change, please write your name on, there's a little sheet, sign up to the next test. So we're hoping to maybe start a net zero 2020 tournament or something like that. So please, oh yeah, there we go. Write your name. The next test. It's loads of things happening. We need volunteers. We need people who love cricket, and we need people who want to act. So if you're feeling like you need to do something, please join us. All my pockets. Where did I leave it? I know, I was getting it from this all the time. Wait a minute. Oh, there it is. Okay. So, take my glasses. I'm going to actually stand here because the recorder's here. Yep. Vitae Lampada, the true custodians of the game. She is staring out the window, a gaze caught by memory. The mulberry tree once cast this room in mostly shade. The light that did escape the trappings of that tree revealed an oil painting of a cricket field in the height of summer. Heavy bookcases, his battered chair, a television in the corner, somewhat out of place. Grandfather would never allow that tree to be cut. He was wise. The cricket he taught them was to master oneself, to grow wise, to adapt and meet challenges with courage, and to overcome life's pitfalls. He handed them the torch. Cricket was not played in her school, and this bitterly insulted her grandfather. In this particular memory, she was 11. They were drinking tea together. He was grumbling about current affairs on the television. Tomfoolery, children walking out of school, what has this world come to? Being 11, she didn't know how to respond. She continued drinking her tea, saying nothing. She knew something about the youth strikes. Her friends talked about it at school. Some even attended the strikes with their parents. Grandfather knows lots, she thought to herself, and she trusts him. He turned in his chair with an expression commanding her attention. This climate change, we've got it in order. Our government are leading the way. My old pal Gummer from Cambridge, the Lord, he's been working on this for years. These hooligans aren't going to achieve anything on the streets. Utter pish, he huffed. She finished her tea, her reflection from the bottom of the mug looking back at her. He held out the old battered roses tin, instructing, not inquiring, if she wanted the last biscuit. Turning back to this room now, she notices something has changed. Or is it she who's changed? The world certainly has. Time passes in a frantic panic. Crisis after crisis on the news. Those hazy, slow summers he described, the one in that painting, they never were hers. The seasons are all a-kilter or engulfed by storms. Very little cricket is played now. It's 2029, and she is 21. Still gazing out the window, that's what's changed. She goes through the French doors into the garden to meet the mulberry tree like an old friend. Several of the limbs have fallen, the leaves stained. This tree suffers, like most of the city trees nowadays. This room is bathed in light. She is overwhelmed by sorrow. It grips her heart. The mulberry was a member of the family. 3 white painted stumps faded on its trunk. Turning back, she sees the shelf in the late afternoon sun, glowing golden with wisdom almanacs. She picks up the 2019 edition. Her fingers leave through it. She yearns to return to that magnificent summer when Stokesy performed that superhuman feat. Her eyes stop, captured by an article. Cricket in the environment. Australia's burning. A heavy realisation dawns in her. They knew this crisis was upon us, yet they changed nothing. Anger swiftly becomes regret. She should have been with her peers on the streets for the youth strikes. There is so much she wants to ask grandfather. She misses him. She misses cricket, the kind of cricket he recounted in his endless tales. Finding solace, remembering to herself, he would be proud, for she was taught well. The spirit of the game resides in her heart, and with the true custodians, the players. Looking down at the photograph accompanying the article, it mentions the Extinction Rebellion Cricket Club. She recalls they still play during these strange times. Do they carry the Vita Lampada? I'll let you sum up.
I'm not sure there's much more to say really, apart from thank you all so much for coming. It's been really inspiring to hear Russell, as it always is, but also to hear all the questions and enthusiasm and everything from the floor. It's kind of just like gives you another lease of life, I suppose, to keep trying. And yeah, thank you all very much.